So in the last class we have seen how to create classes and how to use them. Just to recall two things that you have already tried in your lab. The getter and setter method. So these methods are slightly different from that of your ordinary getters and setters in the other programming language. So in the get and set, you actually write the common get and set for all the properties. And depending upon the name that is specified, automatically the property is chosen by the PHP and it is being used up. So this is the using the magic method. Then we have seen the static keyword. Let's quickly go through the what are static keywords. Now, when you declare a static keyword, in order to access the values which are of the properties which are declared as the static, you have to use the double colon. You will not be able to use the member selector, that is the greater than, with the static variables. And this keyword is not available with respect to the static, as well as you can also declare the scope of the static variable. So this is known to you. Let's go to the next one, just a simple example over here. So in order to declare something as a static, you start with the public or the other data types, static followed by the variable name. You can also have a static function along with the static variables. And if at all you want to use the static, you will have to use either the keyword self or the static. There is the other keyword that you can think of using. Static itself is a keyword that you can think of using in order to use it. There is one other important thing. When I try to say static, static is not available to the other member variables. If at all you want to use a static within a function, the function itself must be a static. Okay? Otherwise, you will end up in a trouble. Let's look at a constant. This is also seen in your last class. So I will quickly go through it. You have already tried them in your lab. So in order to declare a constant, you use the word const. And in order to use this constant, either you can use the class name followed by the constant with the member selector, and that is the double colon, and the self followed by the double colon, or a static followed by the double colon. Okay. There is another important thing about the constant, and that is the derived classes can override a constant that was declared in the base class. Let me quickly show that thing. I have a class here. Let me say I have a class called as a base class. And let me declare a constant here. Okay. When you declare a constant, you just say constant and say name equal to. In order to use this one, you have to use and the name. This is one way of getting it. Suppose if you want to get the other one, suppose if you want to get that constant, say let's say function, some function, and then I can use the same, the name of it is the base, the name of this class is base, so I can use that constant. This is one way of doing it. The other way is static followed by this, it's allowed. Okay. Now what about this self? Three ways of accessing it. Either the name of the class, this is with terms of the name of the class, or with the keyword static, or with the keyword self. So these are the three ways in which you can get it. Let's look at some other thing. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to create a class called as derived Now I'm going to declare this constant here. Now if I echo this constant from the derived class, what is it I'm going to get? So first of all, let me create the object. I'll override that thing. Let's say drv equal to new derived let me echo this. Let me try to echo this name. What is that I'm going to get if I try to do that? You can expect the result, and you can say that I try to access that name here, and it just says I can get that name. Now let me go over here and let me try to get with respect to the class. I'll just go to this derived and then name. You will notice that the NetBeans is actually hinting the value. So if I try to show the value now, you will notice that this is image. Now you notice that there is a base. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say it extends the base. Now you notice a problem here. There is a constant called as name in the base, as well as there is a constant called as name in the derived class. Which one will be taken up? If I try to say derived of name, is it from here or is it from the other one? Suppose if I try to run this one, you will notice that it is taking this. So the constant that is declared in the base or within the class is a constant for the given class. The derived class can have a constant with the same name but with the different values. So in other words, a derived class can override a constant that is declared in the base class. So what will happen if the derived class does this? So this time it is not a constant, it is a variable. So in the base class you have a constant and in the derived class you have a variable. So both of them have the same name. In this case, what is going to happen? You will notice that when I try to use it, it's going to give 1, 2, 3, 4. Why didn't it give you this value? It's a very obvious thing. The way in which I'm accessing it is different. Now, if at all I want to access this image, then I have to say echo and then use the object, in this case drv, and then use the name. So look at this one. This name is a variable and this one is a constant. So when you say with the scope resolution operator, that is double colon, it just means to say that it has nothing to do with the object, it is just going back to the class. So here there is a lot of difference. This automatically means that you are trying to refer to a variable and there is no conflict in this case, even though the name says the same, or when you look at the name it looks like it's the same, but if you really look at both the lines, you'll get it. This one has to do with the class, whereas this one has to do with the object. So when you try to call using the scope resolution operator, you just mean to say that you want to call it from the class itself. When you use this symbol, you mean to say that it is the member that you are trying to access within the object and you get the member selected. Let me go back to the next one. Okay. The next thing that you must understand is whenever you declare a variable, when you declare a constant, you cannot think of doing this. Now this is 1 plus 3, which is a constant again, but you know there is an error, and the error automatically is it just says that I will not be able to do a calculation on the value and get the final result back to it. In other words, the expressions are not allowed when you try to assign a value to a constant. It must be a constant. You cannot use a expression, or you cannot use the name of a variable which is already declared as a constant. Both of them are not allowed. If you type a plain constant value, that is the integer or a float or even a constant string, it is all acceptable, but not any kind of expression. That's what it says. It cannot be a variable, cannot be a class member, or a result of operation. All of them are not valid when it comes to the constant. I think I've already shown you an example here. So you have a constant called as value, and here you notice that within the function, I'm trying to access this constant. To access this constant within the function, you use the built-in word self followed by the scope resolution, and then the constant that is declared. This is called within the function. You notice over here, I am not directly invoking this constant. I'm invoking a function which is not a constant, which is not a static. I'm just creating an object and then instantiating it. It goes here, and within this object, I call that the constant. The next one is serializing. We have already seen what is the meaning of saying serializing. Serializing is nothing but we are converting an object into a string or a string format. The reason why we are using it, again, from the world of Java, you are already familiar. When you want to serialize the content back to a disk or back to across the network, you cannot put the object across the wire and assume that it's going to go and reach to the other destination. You will have to convert it into a byte format and then transfer it. That is true even when you talk about the PHP. If you want the objects to be available across multiple pages or in a session, you will have to serialize it. Okay. When you try to serialize, you are converting a object into a string of strings which can be stored and retrieved back. How do I serialize it? You have already tried this thing in the last practical by using the word serialize. Now, if the object is serialized, how do you get it back? To get it back, you use the unserialize. Again, this is tried in the last lab, so you are already familiar with it. And most of the time, when we use the serialization is when we want to place a large object into a session. If you directly place a large object into a session, when you try to access it, you will get unexpected errors or sometimes unwanted errors. So serialize it and place it into a session, and unserialize it back when you really want to get it back. The next one is the inheritance. Again, inheritance is a parent and child relationship. However, here there is a small difference. You're already familiar. Whenever you create a child extends out of parents, and child can have more methods and more functionality than that of a parent, which is true even in the other programming language. So this is just a plain inheritance. And how do you inherit something? You use the keyword extend. So the new class extends an existing class. A simple example over here, I have a class A and I have this class B. So class A has some method, and I'm just using the class B to extend the class A, and the public methods of the class A will be automatically available to the public method of class B. What about the private and what about the protected? Let's look at that particular thing. Most of you are not aware of that particular thing. Let me create a private variable here. Private, say some x, and I'm going to assign a value 1 here. Now I have derived it here. So my derived class is extending out of a base class. Will the private available over here? So if I create a function, and let's say some function something, and the question is, if I say this, will I be able to get this x here? So is it directly available to the other side? So let me if it is available, let me print that thing. Let me create a object and we call obj equal to new derived, and then I'm going to call from this obj, I'm going to call shift F6 here, and you notice that it just says that undefined property derived colon x. That means to say that the x that I am trying to access was not actually available here. So when you keep the x over here, you might have noticed that the netbeans actually hints and says that it is possible. It's the same x that you are talking about. But when you look at that particular thing in a real run, you'll notice that the behavior is slightly different. It just says that you try to access this derived colon x here, and that is not available here. So the private is private to the class. Private does not go to the derived classes. So if you create a private variable, it's not available. What will happen if you create a private method, my method, and will I be able to access this one? So if I go over here to this object, and if I try to look at here, only something is available. The reason why something is available is I have not declared anything. That means it is assuming that it is a public method and it should be available outside. What about here? So how do I access the variable? Next one. How do I get this? Let's look at the other one. I'll come to this private. Private was not available. Let's go and let me try to create a protected $y equal to. So this time it is protected. That means it must be available to the other side. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say this, and you know this time it's trying to hint and say that I could get that thing. And if I say something with the semicolon here, try to run it, you must be able to echo that thing. I'll just echo this one here so that I see something as an output. You get that thing here. That was the thing that this is there in the base class, and it went to the other class and it is available. Now the next question is, so this 10 which is protected here is available to the derived class. Can I get that y directly here? So this is an object and I am trying to get the y which was available in the extended class. It came up to here. So I create an object and then try to access that y directly. So what will happen if I try to do that? You end up in a big trouble, and it just says that it is derived, not that it's protected, but the object has no rights on it. So be careful. Most of you fail to understand this particular thing. When your protected variables or protected members are available to the child class, but not the object of the child class, you always think it in a wrong way. That is true in almost all programming languages. See, what is protected is available to the child class. Nobody says that it is available to the object of that child class. So it comes within the class, that's all. It comes within this class, you have an access to anything that is protected. But once you create an object out of it, you are not in the class, you are in the object out of that class. Nothing comes to the object. They are not free for the object of the class, they are free only for the derived classes. So think whenever this kind of questions, tricky questions are asked in the MCQ, think carefully, and the logical answer is when you create something as a protected, it's available for within this class as well as within the derived classes, but not to anything else apart from this. So if you have a object, that's not a class. So that means they will not be available out. Okay. So this is something that most of you are not able to get it. So next time when something comes, you just be careful with that. So let's look at the other one. We have seen what is a self. There is something called as a parent. You can use the parent. The word meaning says everything. If at all you want to access the parent objects, you can use that thing. So let's go over here and let's say instead of this using this, can I say the parent? Parent means, so can I think of getting the parent? Let me go over here and let me save it and run it. I think I have an error here because of the previous mistake. This is not the. Now, when I try to say parent here, it also said that you are trying to access a constant which is not there. So why didn't it get the y here? Why the y was not directly available over here? So the meaning is slightly different when you say the parent. The problem comes whenever the reason why you are using parent is when you have the same definition in this class as well as in the parent class. Suppose there is the same method in the base class as well as in this class, and you want to say that do not call this method, call the parent's method. In that case, you do it. So let me highlight it with a simple example. I'm not going to go with the private, protected, and other things. So let me make it as a public, and let me make it as a, how many times I typed that thing wrong. Let's say method A. I'm going to just give a name here, method A, and I'm going to echo. This is base method A. I'm going to get this one, and in the extended class, forget about all this something and other. So don't worry about this something and other. So what I've done is in the base class there was a method. In the derived class the same method is there. Now the obvious answer, what will happen if you try to call the method A? I'll just go here and I'm going to say this is derived method A. So in the extended I have it as a derived. In the parent I have it as the base. So if I try to call this method, you can expect it to be the same. Now let me go over here and let me add a method B in the derived class. This method is going to call method A. Now you notice that the hinting is already there by the being saying that you're actually trying to call the same method. So I'm going to just run this one just to tell you what is it going to do, and you can expect the answer. That is from the derived because I tried to call it. Now sometimes you notice that you have a method in the parent, method A, and the method A is also there in the derived class. Now what if you want to call that parent method, not the method which is immediately available to you? In this case, you change and then put the parent. So the parent is used now to say that I want to call the parent's method A, not the child method A. So in this case, what's going to happen? So if you try to do it, how many errors are you going to get? So I'm trying to I'm supposed to call this last time anyhow, it would have done the one thing I was expecting to do. So let me zoom it a bit, remove the extra spaces here, okay, some extra space. Let me give it a try now. And you notice last time even I'm going to just try that same thing. It's obvious one. You notice at this time it is calling from the base. The reason why it is calling from the base is in the method B I have just told go to the parent, not this one. Now suppose if I do this here, what would have happened? The answer is obvious one. So just a waste of time. Now this is the derived class. If you say this or self, it means to say that the method that is there within the same class. Now when you say parent, it just means to say that in the parent the same method is there. I don't want you to call, so when I say this statement, it means to say that within this class, again I can use the self here, it's going to be one and the same. Okay, this is one and the same, it's again the one. So this is not the same. If I say self, that means within the same class, or this within the same class. When I say parent, I just mean to say to the interpreter that go to the parent and then try to get something from the parent. So that word parent is used only in a situation where you have overridden something in the derived class and you want to go to the base class and call its method. I think you also have the parent in the other programming language that does the same thing. You just call the parent and then try to call it. Now, regarding a constructor, there is some problems with the constructor. The constructor does not work like the constructor that you have in the other programming language. In the other programming language, when you have a constructor and if you derive a object or a class out of the other class, and if this constructor is called, this constructor automatically goes to the base, calls its constructor, and then derives it. So just to say that, suppose if you have a class here and there is a constructor for this class, and if you derive one more class that is extending out of this class, and if you have a constructor of this, when you call the constructor of a derived class, this constructor automatically goes and calls the constructor of the base class. So base object is created and it wraps its constructor on top of the base. Now this is done automatically by the other programming language. When it comes to the PHP, that does not happen. Okay? The existing class constructor will not go to the parent constructor and call anything on the parent. Let's look at that in an action. Let me go over here and let me go to the base class here, and I'm going to create a function. And you know very well the function, the one that we are using is this one, echo, and I'm going to just say constructor of base. So there is a constructor in the base. That's the only thing. The derived object here, all these things does not make any sense. I'm going to just get rid of them. They don't make any sense here. Did I delete that? I want to delete all these things. They are not required. So there is a constructor in the base class, and I don't have anything in the derived class. I'm going to get rid of everything except that the derived class, this derived class is derived out of base. That's the only thing. And I'm trying to create an object out of it. I don't want to do anything. I just want to create an object out of a derived class. You notice that the derived class does not have a constructor of its own, but the base class has a constructor. Now, if I try to run this particular thing, you will notice that it has called the constructor of the base class. I have echo statement here. This says. So when I created this derived object was extension of base. So it went to the base and called the base constructor. Now, what will happen if I have a constructor for this class itself? So if I have a constructor of derived, now in your other programming language, what you would have seen is it will call both the base as well as the derived. This constructor will go back in the other programming language. This constructor will go back to the other constructor, call this constructor first, and then once this construction is over, it will come back to your constructor. This is what usually happens in the other programming language. What will happen in the C#? In the PHP. When it comes to the PHP, you notice a strange behavior. It just calls the constructor of the derived class. It that will not go back to the parent class and initialize it, anything of that type. It just calls its constructor and it forgets about the base constructor. You must be extremely careful when you try to call the constructor. If you're not very careful, what you will end up in is creating an object whose state is not proper. Now, why do you use a constructor? In order to initialize the object. Okay. Now, what has happened with this line is it has initialized this object, but not the base object. So that means to say that the state of the base is not known. If you use this object in an actual calculation, you will end up in a big trouble because half of it is not initialized. So the base part is not initialized because it didn't call any constructor. Suppose if you had something like you are setting some initial value x equal to 10, y equal to 10, you were doing all this kind of setting the initial value or setting a connection, this kind of thing in the base. Now, because the base constructor is not called, only the derived constructor is called, all those things are not initialized. And if you use this object in your next calculation, most of them will automatically fail. So the question now is, how can I call the parent constructor? Now, by default PHP is not calling. What if I want to call the base constructor? In that case, you get this thing which is very handy. And here I am exclusively asking my constructor of the derived class, go to the base, call the constructor. You notice a strange thing here again. In the last practical I have told you, you are not calling directly a magic method. Magic methods are not called by you. Magic methods are automatically called by the PHP. But in this case, you notice the same thing. I am actually trying to call, this is my line. This is not given by the PHP. This is what I have typed. That means as a developer, I am calling the constructor of the base. I'm telling the PHP that I want you to call, exclusively I want you to call a magic method. It's allowed in this scenario. So now if I run this particular program, I think I have not saved it. Let's see. You notice it called this base constructor and then it went back. So it called the base constructor because I gave this parent and told it go to the parent's constructor and call it. Now these are a special case wherein you will have to force the PHP to do that thing. So this is what happens. So if the child class possesses a constructor, it is executed and any of the parent constructor is ignored. That's a very important thing. If a child has a constructor, only its constructor is called by default. The parent constructor is ignored. So this is the way in which the PHP works, and this is not the way in which most of the other programming languages are working. So let's look at this particular example over here. This is an example of a point. I think you have done it in your C++ classes wherein you created a two-dimensional point and three-dimensional point. A point is nothing but a dot in space with x and y values. So I have a constructor. Okay, this is same as your Java constructor. You just say x comma y and you initialize the x comma y. The other methods are not really required for us. Let me derive. This is a two-dimensional point x comma y. Let me derive a three-dimensional point. What's a three-dimensional point? A point in a space with x comma y comma z. Now I take both the values x and y, but I don't have x and y. X and y is there with the parent. So I take this x and y value and then I tell the PHP, go to the parent, call this constructor of this parent and supply this x and y value. So the parent x and y are getting initialized and then come back and initialize the z value of my constructor. So this is how it goes. I think I don't have to show again and again the same thing. And this is regarding the protected. I think I've already talked much about it. So when you have a protected, if you create anything, protected comes into the extended class, but protected cannot come to the object. This is not allowed. So a protected variable will come to the base, but it will not come to the object. That one thing you must know. understand. Next one is overriding. What's the meaning of saying overriding? The same name is used again. So when you override, these things are same. You are just saying that the same method is available. So there is one problem. Let's look at that problem. Let's go over here and let's say I have a method. I'm going to just give a good name to all these methods. So let me have a function. I don't know why that sequence first. $x and $y. I'm not really interested in doing the actual calculation. And I'm going to say echo, and I'm going to say x and y. Remember, this is not going to print the value of x and y. I'm just saying that x and y values are available to you. I just copied it. So this is just a overloading, and you are all familiar with it. Now I'm going to just say, I'm sorry, it is not called as overloading. It is so you have it to here. Now I have x, y, z, and the other one is x1. Now what is it called as? Is this a override? Are you overriding the add method which is there in the base class? Is this a overriding? So you have a add here, you have a add here, and you have a add here. It takes two parameters. It takes three parameters. So is it overriding? Do you say that add has been overridden in the derived class according to your other programming language? This is overloading or overriding. So I am asking overriding. So you say that it is not overriding. So let's go over here and I already have a object of this type. So let me try to call this one, and let me try to call this add method, and I'm going to supply 10 and 20. So which one will be called? So I'm supplying 10 and 20. In this case, which one will be called? So add has two methods. One is the add two variable, and the other one is the add with the three variables. So xy and xyz is there, and I have supplied only two values. So which one will be called according to you? Base. So let's look at what is going to happen if you try to run this. You get a warning directly saying that the third argument was not supplied to me, and you notice even though I have not supplied the third argument, it is trying to call this x, y, z, and if it was calling this, it would have just said x, y. But now it's saying x, y, z, and here you notice that it called its own method, not the parent method. So this is one of the huge area wherein you get a lot of confusion regarding this. The reason for this is, remember, PHP, even if you don't supply any argument, suppose if I create a method, let me create a method. This is not a derive or anything of that type, just an ordinary method. I'm going to call it as sub, and I'm going to say that I am not passing anything to this. So empty method called as sub without any parameters. So any argument, an empty method, and I'm going to just call sub here, and I'm going to supply a value 10 and 20 to it. So you look at the definition over there. In the definition, there are no arguments to be passed to the sub, but I just supply it. So if I try to do this one, and if I run it, what will happen? You notice over here, I'm calling sub here, not the add method. So this is, if you want, I can just say sub and xyz, so that you know very well that I'm in the same place. I run this one, you notice that it is trying to call this method. You notice a strange thing. I have this definition does not take any parameter, but I still supply it. So this is one thing that you must always understand. PHP does not expect anything there. Whether you supply it or not, it doesn't care. Whether you supply 2 variable, 10 variable, 20 variable, it doesn't make any sense to it. Now, let me come back to the previous thing. When I supplied add here, and when I said run it, you notice that it didn't stop the execution. It never gave me a fatal exception saying that I'm not going to proceed with it. You never gave me a third variable. Instead of that, it just warns me and says, I'm proceeding ahead with the values. You never supplied me the third one. According to the definition, you were supposed to supply 3 parameters, but you didn't do that. That's okay with me. I'm going to go ahead with it, and it starts printing it. But this is not an exception. It's just a warning to me saying that you missed out one of the values. Be careful with it. PHP, when you supply this kind of thing, when you supply the values here, whether you write it or not, the PHP doesn't care about them. It's for your reference. So what does that mean? It simply means that I cannot do this. What is this in the other programming language called as? This technique in the other programming language, this kind of technique is called as, this kind of technique in the other programming language. It's called as, the same method name is there, but the variables are different. What are they called as? Overloading. Now you don't have anything called as overloading in PHP because PHP does not care about the number of arguments. So if you notice over here, it just says that you gave me the sub, it's all over. Once you say this is a sub, this sub, this sub, and this sub, or some other sub, they are all same to me because I am not expecting you to supply anything to me here. You supply it or not, it's your problem. I don't care about those two values there. Now, what if you really wanted to get the values? I think I have already shown you this. If you really want to do this, you have function get the argument. This is the function that you can think of using. Get the argument value or get the number of arguments that are supplied. Within the function, you can just ask it, tell me how many arguments are supplied. This is going to tell me, in this case, if I call this method with if I call this sub with the 2 methods, and if I just echo this one, I'm not go for the actual argument. This is going to tell me how many arguments I am supplying. So even though there is nothing is there, I'm just asking a function called as function number of arguments. Tell me how many arguments are supplied, and if I try to run this one, you will notice that it's going to give me 2 arguments. 2 arguments were supplied here, so this function. If I want to get the individual arguments, there is this one, and specify all the arguments. It will give you an array of arguments. You specify the argument number that you want to extract, you are going to get the individual argument. So in PHP, this is one problem, a huge problem of for huge confusion. A lot of people miss out that thing. There is nothing called as overloading in PHP. It's not possible because the reason why it is not possible is the data types are cross-verified at runtime. So when you create a x here and when you create y here, is this a int? Is this a float? It's not known. The actual value at runtime is probed, and then it says that this is int, this is a float, and so on and so forth. So you can't say that first 2 parameters are int, then the third is the float and other thing. That's not possible. So there is no way in which you can change the signature of a function. For PHP, this is the signature of the function. That's all. The function sub is declared. That's it. Function sub with the 100 number of arguments is same as this function, because for it there is only one sub function. Now, if you want to overload it, then there is a technique. I'm going to talk about it. Let me not waste too much of time on that. Let's come back to this. So this is overriding. I think I've already told you. There must be same number of the same name, and you notice over here the parameters may differ. It is still overriding. So if you have 4 parameters here, 10 parameters here, this is going to win. The parent is always lost because it is not going to take anything from the parent. And I think I've already told you. We want to access the parent. I'm not going to try this thing. use the parent followed by the colon in order to invoke something from the parent. So you have a method here. This is for A. This B extends A, and if you create the object of A, object of B, if you just call the same method with